Good morning. Good morning to y'all. Good to see you today. Shout for joy to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of his name and make his praises glorious. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. So great is your power that your enemies cringe before you. All the earth bows down to you. They sing praise to you. They sing the praises of your name. Come and see what God has done, his awesome deeds for mankind. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Come, let us rejoice in him. Psalm 66, 1 through 6. I'll be referring to that psalm in the course of the introduction. We're glad to see you today, and I pray that you will have a genuine encounter with God as you hear his word and respond to it. At this time, we're going to have a little preparation and the chimes, and then our call to worship, our prelude will be Like a River Glorious. The title of the message today is Who Parts the Waters? From Exodus 13 to 15:21. And the prelude is Like a Glorious River, because we're going to the Red Sea and get ready to cross. moments in prayer. And pretty soon we're going to get organized for our 40 days of prayer. I think I'll talk a little bit about that tonight and project a time when we can start doing that. Anyway, let's look at the prayer list. Some of you have already done that, and I appreciate Kathy taking care of getting this to us and keeping it up to date. I'll read the names that are in dark, and if you want to add anybody or make a comment, Kathy just said that Martha Schussler is in the hospital. If you didn't know that, she went in last night. Is that what you said? Okay, so we want to add her. She's not on here. Okay, family of Charles Dutton. We put those on last week. Family of Lalou Salter. And then drop down for those names. Doris Chappell, in the hospital with pneumonia and COVID. You can comment on her, anybody? Bobby and Shay Clarity. That's, who's that, Gary?
That's my son and daughter-in-law. Shay came home from the hospital, but still very sick, so we need to keep her.
Okay. All right. And Kathy is doing better from last week. Meta, I talked to her, and she said, well, home sounded good. Is she okay? As far as I know, she sounded like she had that old spirit back. That was good. Yeah, got her heart shot back into rhythm. Wow, it's amazing what can be done to us. Fixes a lot of good praises up there. As I said last week, we got the babies back home, thankfully, and the mom and daddy was able to make it through the whole week, and that's good too, because we're always on call. Anybody that want to add to the prayer list or make a comment in any way? Yeah, Bill?
Steve Burke's out of the hospital with COVID. He's doing better.
Good deal. Good.
Buddy Marner's brother-in-law, his wife that died not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Her brother died this past week, and his first name is Hubert, but I cannot remember. I'll get the last name.
All right, it'll come to you a little later. Yes?
I got a text from Brenda McBrayer asking us to pray for her. She's having some sort of eye surgery this next Wednesday that should clear up some, it's a retina issue, I think, should clear up some vision. She asked for
Okay.
prayers.
Brenda McBrayer, eye issues. Okay. Yeah, Pat. Yeah.
Mary Robinson.
Uh-huh. Add that to the list.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Anybody
I
else?
also talked to Teresa Free, and I don't know if people know, I'm sure they do, that Jennifer got her results back. She had several lymph nodes removed, and 2 of them were malignant, and they did see the surgeon who said she'd probably have radiation, but they have an appointment with the oncologist coming up whenever she can be cleared of COVID.
Okay.
So.
Jennifer. Okay. All right. I think that when we engage in I think we all of us pray pretty much every day, but we're just going to put a little more focus on it and have a little guide for us, and I think it'll really make a difference, particularly as we're prepared to hear someone in a couple of weeks, February the 7th. I'm assuming that's still on, February the 7th. Okay. All right, look over the list, choose a name or two, and pray for them as Jackie leads us in this prayer time.
Dear Father, this is the day that you have made. We ask you to let us rejoice and be very glad in it. It's a very beautiful day, another gift of a day for us to love you more, to serve you better. Thank you for this day. We thank you for this church, dear Father, what it means to each person here. And we know there are so many people in this community, so many members of this church who want to be here or who we want to be here. And we ask you to bless them and inspire them to come and join us. And we ask you to prepare us to do whatever we need to do to encourage people to come and worship in this fellowship. We thank you for the love within it and for all the many wonderful opportunities that we have here at Alpine. We thank you for all the blessings that you bestowed on each person here. Let us never take those blessings for granted. For those, dear Father, that are on our prayer list and those who have needs that only you are aware of, we ask you to help us to prayerfully consider those needs, to fervently pray for those people who are sick, those people who have lost loved ones. Pray by name, dear Father, and ask your blessings. Ask you to heal them if it be your will. Ask you to wrap your loving arms around them and to give them hope and to give them peace. And for those, dear Father, who are struggling, who are not sick, but have other emotional needs or whatever, you know those needs. We ask you to give them hope and to bless them with peace. We ask you, dear Father, to heal our land. And we ask you to be in touch with those people who are directing our country, who are making decisions. And we ask you to help them make decisions that will be pleasing to you. For all the blessings you've given us, we thank you, dear Father. As we continue in this service, give us eyes and ears so that we may be open to whatever you may have to teach us. In your name we pray.
Forgot to mention, Neva sent me a text. She said the ox was in the ditch. I guess that means do you know anything about that, what's going on there? She said she couldn't make it today, so we'll pray for her also. At this time, we're going to have a hymn, Lord, Here Am I. Let's hear that hymn now. Wonderful to hear the piano and the organ together like that. Who parts the waters? We're going to hear three different people read the scriptures. I didn't want to read chapter 13, 14, and 15, but I picked out certain scriptures to tie in together in this sermon about who parts the waters. Terry's going to begin, and then Gary, and then Kathy.
Chapter 13, verses 17 and 18. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land of confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this.
Chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left.
Exodus chapter 14, verses 30 and 31. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant. Exodus 15, verse 11. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working in wonders?
During this interim period, I try to address as much as I can and refer to the interim period and help you navigate through it. There's so much depends on your attitude and the attitude of the church in general, how you view the present situation, and maybe some uncertainty that you might be feeling. I know you might be feeling some of that. This passage in the book of Exodus, it yields some powerful truths that are instrumental in producing a positive attitude about things, situations, and it will facilitate the process that you've already been following and making good decisions. And you will continue to do that in the few weeks ahead, however that may be. The salvation recorded here in Exodus 13:17 to 15:21, that big block there, proved climatic and decisive for the nation of Israel. These events eventually acquired greater and greater significance as time went on, and they were regarded by Israel as the mightiest acts of salvation and redemption. The monumental nature of these events lead them to be memorialized in Israel's earliest creeds and celebrated in their songs, and that's what I read, Psalm 66, verses 1 through 6 a while ago. Following God's leadership, the Israelites left Egypt in a hurry. Remember that don't use any yeast in your bread. You don't have time for the bread to rise. Get ready, it's time to go. And when they reached the Red Sea, there was a blockage. They blocked their way forward. Whoa, what are we going to do now? And then, to make a bad situation worse, the rumbles of the chariots behind them coming after them. Can you imagine what they must have felt? They began to panic. And what did they say? Moses, take us back. Why did you do this to us? It's hard to understand. They still had a slave mentality now, remember. They've only been out of just a short period of time out of Egypt. And so, from this block of scripture, where they're between a rock and a hard place, if you will, there are several truths essential to developing good attitudes and preparing to move forward. And I'm going to follow up next Sunday from Joshua 3 and 4. There's another crossing that takes place at that point in time. Well, let's look at 4 of these truths. Number 1 is found in chapter 13 through 14:9. God's guidance. God's guidance. God knows the best path for us to follow. The Proverbs writer, you're very familiar with this. He said, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and what will he do? He'll make your path straight. How, as I look back on life, how I wish I hadn't got off the path so many times. Not in the briar patch. That's where the trouble is when you get off the path and go out into the briar patch. The closest route from Goshen to Palestine was a sea route. It took about 2 weeks. But here was the problem. That sea route had a whole bunch of Philistine forts, or places where the Philistines had put up some barriers. And you remember, years later, where did that giant come from? The Philistines. So they were not teeny tiny people apparently. They were big people. And so God decided to send them on a longer route. In fact, he told them to turn south. Turn southward for a much longer and a much safer journey, Moses. Furthermore, if you read Exodus chapter 3, you'll see where God says, when you get the people, you'll know I'm in this when you bring the people back to this mountain where Moses was at the burning bush. So Moses is determined to lead those people back to where he encountered God. That's important. Now notice in verses 21 and 22, the way the writer vividly expresses the reality of God's guidance. By day, there's going to be a cloud. And by night, there's going to be fire. So they could travel by day or by night. Doesn't say which one they did. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place from being in front of the people. Now this is the central truth I'm trying to get to. God is doing the guiding. He's ahead of them in their journey. He led Israel in a very unique and personal way. And he'll lead any group of people in a very unique and personal way. If you're paying attention, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that next week. One of the most obvious truths in the text is this: God is the one in charge. Every time I break down and watch a little news, I have to flip it off and say, listen, God, you're in charge, right? You're in charge. He's giving the people guidance, and their deliverance depended on what? They had to follow some direction. Now keep in mind that God positions us where he wants us to be, not necessarily where we think we ought to be. Man, that's an important truth. If we could get the younger people in particular to learn that, maybe we could give some wisdom to them about how we were not where we should have been, even though we thought we were. No doubt, after a reversal of directions that we read, he said, okay, tell the people to turn around. Now you can imagine what they started thinking then. They started losing faith. They began to question whether Moses really knew where he was going. It looked like he was lost. Regardless of how confusing and uncertain the situation, our response may require patience as God works within the circumstances. And we all got circumstances. We could spend a whole sermon on that. So that's the first truth. God is doing the guiding, and when we follow, things will work out okay. Second, God's grace. Chapter 14, verses 10 through 14. I want you to really grab this. God worked and acted in spite of their weak faith. When the Egyptians were sighted, and the rumble of the chariots must have been roaring in their ears, it must have been an awful sound to hear that. I just thought about Ben-Hur, the movie Ben-Hur, that chariot race in Ben-Hur. That was a loud, loud race, sounded like. Fear seized them. Fear. The sea loomed in front. They couldn't turn back. And their mindset was, we need to go back. We don't want them to kill us. Let's just go back. The Hebrew word here for cry out always means to cry out in great distress, free of fear. Their reaction demonstrated the weakness of their faith. And so does ours. How we react to certain situations, how we react to the pandemic. Do we have faith that God is in control and that this thing is going to get worked out eventually? It's important to recognize that precisely at the moment when Israel's future was the bleakest and their faith was the weakest, what happened? God chose to act. Now, that is abounding grace at work. It's what Paul refers to, abounding grace at work. The faith of the people did not produce the deliverance. The deliverance of the people enhanced their faith as they went forward. Now, in the end, all the glory, all the credit for this great act of liberation belonged to God, not to them. No one could claim credit for what God was doing, not even Moses. Now, for me, this truth calls into question a lot of the theology that you hear and that I grew up hearing. And it's theology of many today. They stress the importance of your faith. You just don't have enough faith. Or the lack of faith causing your prayers not to be answered. How many times have you heard that before? Let me tell you about what happened to me when I was about 10, 11 years old. I was playing Little League baseball, and I knew I couldn't see the baseball. I knew I was half blind. But I didn't want to wear glasses, because one of my friends wore glasses and people made fun of it. So I was taught in Sunday school that if you pray believing, God would answer your prayer. And I'm telling you this, I'm not making it up. I don't remember it clearly, but it's pretty clear. I remember getting down on my hands and knees in my bed, holding my little hands like this and saying, God, I got faith. Please make my eyes 20/20. Please, God. And then I'd hop into bed and I'd go to sleep. Next morning, I'd wake up one eye at a time. Well, didn't do it in that one. Let me try this one. No, I didn't do it in that one either. I got really confused about all that. I mean, a 10 or 11-year-old kid, I mean, who can have more faith than that? And I prayed as I said, I know how, God, I just really want to see. It didn't happen. I have to wear my glasses, finally got contacts, then I got some LASIK surgery, and then I got, so people about what all we go through trying to see. Then I got all these lenses in my eye, and it's amazing how you can see now with an artificial lens back in the back. Anyway, that's a medical issue there. Anyway, Moses responded, and his response was one of the greatest calls to faith in the whole Bible, verses 13 and 14. Fear not, great sermon. Fear not, stand still and see what God is going to do. The Lord will fight for you. You just need to stand still. The psalmist adds to this meaning by saying, be still and what? Know that I am Yahweh. I am God. Now, there's some more to that verse. I will be exalted among the nations. Do you worry about the nations that we have as enemies? I do sometimes, yeah. But verses like these help me deal with it. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the whole earth. Wow. So we got God's guidance and God's grace, now God's greatness. Starting at verse 15 of chapter 14. If God be for us, who or what can stand against us? There's a music editor by the name of Charlie Brown. I hope that's right. I didn't double check it, but he said he was a music editor and composer named Charlie Brown. It's not a joke. He heard a college student in a study group pray, just when I think I'm going under, you heard the rest of it? Lord always parts the waters. Inspired, Charlie Brown wrote, Part the Waters. A musical affirmation of divine power as our ultimate hope. It requires great faith to literally trust in God in the midst of desperate times, like a pandemic, like sitting here with these masks on. It just looks so weird sitting out there with those masks on. And what if I was up here doing this and we're all just scared to death? We're supposed to do what's practical and what we need to do. But man, we've got to trust in God's power. To trust in divine power does not mean that we know in advance how God will work out the details of the situation. Who among us in January the 24th, 2020 had any idea what we would be going through this year? Nobody. Absolutely nobody. Now, we may not know the future for 2021, but this is The trite but true statement. We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. One night during World War II, General Eisenhower stood with his officers as troop-laden ships sailed out into the midst of the sea, and airplanes roared off into the air, into the night air. Deeply moved by this sight, he came to attention. He saluted the brave men. He bowed his head, and his officers joined him in this moment of devotion. Turning to his officers, Eisenhower said, "There comes a time when you've used your brains, you've used your technical skill, and you've used all that training. Then the outcome is in the hand of God, and that's where we must leave it." The proper object of faith is not some prescribed action of God, because he may not act the way we think he should, but it's God himself. How odd it would have been for God to save these people and do all these wonderful things and lead them up to this point and then say, "Well, y'all just messing up too bad. I'm going to go ahead and let y'all be taken over by the Egyptians." He wasn't going to do that. Listen, how odd for God to bless this congregation for nearly 200 years and then leave you adrift, just kind of floating along. God's not going to do that. The future's good. The future is bright. I get excited about thinking about your future. And that I have a part in it, of having been here in this interim time. I'm coming back to see how it's going. Absolutely. Those whom God redeems, he cares for. Those who come under the wings of his salvation come under the care of his special providence. Verses 30 and 31 provide a stunning conclusion to this episode. The Egyptians, who so bitterly persecuted these people for 400 years, they're lying dead on the shore the next morning. Verse 28 says, not one of them, not one was alive. Wiped them all out. When the murmuring people saw the great power of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord this time